Good evening, everybody. We're getting started now. We are meeting with Martin Margulies and Katherine Hind, who is Martin's curator. And hold on here, let me mute everybody so I don't get any interruptions. Martin is he goes by Marty, but I listen to Nunzio, who works for him, call him Mr. Margulies, so I'm not quite sure what the protocol is here. And in as much as I'm typically casual, I'm going to err on the side of being casual. Martin Margulies has had a significant collection for a long time. He has a ferocious appetite for quality art, and he's had his own museum for over a decade. And Katherine, I think, has been working as his curator for over 2 decades. So that he's been doing these different activities for a while, obviously, and we'll get into some of those details. One of the things I'd like to establish first, Marty, is when you grew up, I mean, this is one of those questions that's always intriguing to me to see what the answers are. When you grew up, was there ever any fascination on your part of being an artist? Maybe I have muted you. All right, I've unmuted you. Have you ever thought about being an artist?
Never.
Okay. So when and how did you get interested in collecting?
Well, I went up to New York with a friend and visited a gallery. And there was something very fascinating that just really captivated me. And I said, boy, these people, they talk about art like it's nothing, and they make something of it. And it just made a very strong impression on me. And I said, this is an activity that I think I would really enjoy. And I started getting involved and trying to learn as much as I could.
When was that, do you think?
I think it was in the late 70s. Okay.
And where were you living then? Were you in Florida?
Yes, I was.
Were you raised in Florida?
No, I was raised in New York, and after college, I came down to Miami to see what kind of opportunity I could get involved with and make a career for myself.
Were visual arts significant, or did they play any role in your childhood?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
And when did you start buying art? In the late 70s?
Yes.
When do you think you would have defined yourself first as a collector?
Well, I don't really think of it as a time situation. It just started to evolve in the sense that the more I got involved, the more education I got, the more exposure to galleries, magazines, reading, the more interest level picked up. And I said, gee, this is terrific. I'm really enjoying this activity.
I think it's important to add here that I think you've been really good for the arts and for artists. And I think you and Katherine have personal relationships with many of the artists with whom you have worked, and that personal relationship perhaps has benefited them more than just the acquisition of their artwork by you guys. So I think that's what distinguishes you among many others. And there are many collectors I know that don't have, part of the reason I want to talk to collectors with this group is to demonstrate that collectors often have the same kind of passion that artists have about the artwork. But I think, your passion and your acting on that passion goes beyond what I think the norm is. And I find that, really terribly exciting. Let's move over to Katherine for a second. Where were you raised?
I was raised in Miami.
Okay, and so you and Martin Margulies met in Miami?
We did.
All right, and back to you as a child. Did you ever think you were going to be an artist?
No, I never thought I was going to be an artist.
Did you study art in college?
I did. I studied art history, and that's when I knew that was an area that I wanted to pursue.
Did you major in art history?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did not major in art history.
So, all right. So then tell me what did you do after college, and how did you get to be involved with the Margulies collection?
Well, I knew Marty through my parents in a social sense, and he put me in contact with a group of artists, interestingly enough, that were working out of Chicago. And it was a group of sculptors. They had their own gallery. This was in the late 70s, early 80s when there was
This must be Construct, and Mark DeSuvero and Jerry Pierce, and I can name half of them. Those folks, right?
John Henry, Linda
Yep.
Fleming, Linda Howard.
Yep.
Exactly. I was with Construct and started working with Marty one-on-one with some of his acquisitions and also representing the artists and going to the Chicago Art Fair and the Mayor Jane Burns' Mile of Sculpture back in the early 80s. And so it was really with large-scale sculpture that I started to have a exposure to Marty, and it just clicked, and we had a good working situation. And 30 years later, we've got this space open to the public. And I just wanted to say one thing about your question about friendships to artists. You know, you don't have to see someone often or be close to someone physically, geographically, to have a close friendship. And that's what I've observed with Marty in particular. Their artists, one artist comes to mind, Ernesto Neto, and he may have physically been with Ernesto, maybe you could count it on two hands, how many times, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, but yet the relationship is so close and so personal through the art. We acquired one of Ernesto's first major pieces. It was at the Venice Biennale, and that starts a friendship. And you're not in contact with the person every day, and you may only see them once every year or once every couple of years, but that friendship is so powerful and so poignant and meaningful.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm going to pull up a picture of that sculpture in your warehouse, and give me a second here. So, were you involved in the arts before you began working with Marty, or is that essentially when it began and you guys grew together?
I grew by listening to him.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the Ernesto Neto. That's at our warehouse space. The spice bags are hanging, and there's Marty speaking to, I don't know who that is, but two people, and so you can see the scale of the piece, and that was at Venice when you first saw it. Is that right, Marty?
Yes.
But this picture's in the warehouse.
This picture's at the warehouse in Miami. Yes.
Okay. I think you're really fortunate to have found each other, because you work really well together and you augment each other's interests. Can you describe some of the working relationship? Are you both looking for art individually? Are you not looking for art currently? Are there things that knock your socks off regardless? Do you check in with one another, etc.? Katherine, why don't you go with that?
Marty looks at art, and I do, and acquires it. He makes the deals with the galleries, and I do everything else. But it's his eye, it's his collection, it's the singular eye of one person, and that's Marty.
So he doesn't really say to you, do you think I should acquire this piece? Do we need another one by so-and-so? Or do we want one at all by so-and-so? Do these kinds of questions happen, or is it singularly his vision?
It's singularly his vision, but he does, we have a lot of conversations that start with the phrase, Katherine, wouldn't it be great if?
There you go. Yep. Okay. And Marty, where are you looking mostly? Where do you go to see art?
Well, there's a variety of sources. Number one, I'm up in New York every month, and I go to galleries. I go to art fairs like Basel and several other fairs. I look in magazines, and if I see an ad that is something that I might be interested in, I immediately contact the gallery. Excuse me. And I contact the gallery, and we get JPEGs and various other paraphernalia and see if this work would fit into the collection. So I'm always out there. It's a lot of sources. Auctions are very, very difficult to buy from because in today's world you have mega people spending money indiscriminately, and so my auction of the last couple of years has been no negative results.
Were you buying at auction previously?
Yes, I had been.
I would think it wouldn't be your preferred method because, you know, you are very personable, and I think a lot of it is about the relationship, and there's something kind of clinical about buying at auction.
Well, if a work comes up that fits in the collection,
right,
I'll make a stand for it. There was a great work that I saw of Mario Mertz that was from the Anton Herbert collection in Belgium. And I made a stab at it, but it went beyond my capacity. But, you know, I'll reach for certain works that can enhance the collection. That's very important. But by and large, I've been involved in buying younger people who show at galleries, or I see ads in the magazines and I tear out the pages and I correspond with them.
Okay. Has your pace of acquiring art varied over time? I mean, have there been a year in the last 25 years that you didn't buy any art?
Well, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
I'm always out there, and you know, if I see something exciting that fits into the collection, I yield.
I think
Go ahead, Kat.
We started collecting photography in the mid-1990s. Although the roots went back earlier than that, but there was a commitment made to build a photography collection, and that increased the inventory intake because of your interest in acquiring portfolios, buying things. And it's not important just to have, you know, we had the space to exhibit works and do educational programming, and with photography in particular, we felt it'd be important not just to show one Gary Winogrand, but the whole portfolio of Women Are Beautiful, or a whole portfolio by Danny Lyon. And then, of course, the size and scale of some of the larger color prints. So the photography collection increased the numbers, I guess
Sure.
you would say.
Can you verbalize what fits in the collection?
Well, it's a pretty, I guess the word would be encyclopedic collection. It has great range. For instance, the photography starts from the early 1900s, when we got Louis Hind, 1910, child labor laws, and it goes into the German photographers of 1920s, the early Germans, and the Bauhaus, and the Budamas, the Russian experimental photographies. And so that basically is the time period. We go from there. And if there's a reference point in the newer photos with the early historical Walker Evans, Dorothea Lange, The Human Condition, we generally relate to works like that. We have a large body of work by Helen Levitt and Louis Hind and Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans. So that's the reference point that we kind of begin with.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the painting, in terms of the sculpture, we generally do not go beyond or backward beyond 1940s. It just is impractical for us to acquire Paul-Klein, Kandinsky, those kind of works of the modern era are really not, those kind of works are very difficult to get. And even if you could get them, the financial constraints are very difficult. So we are more or less a post-war collection. We do go back to Miro as our basis because he was such an important influence in the surrealist vernacular and influenced abstract expressionism. So we have a very nice body of work of Miro. And if something comes up that I feel we should take a position in, and again, if it's affordable, we'll move on. Like we recently took a position in Anselm Kiefer. We felt that that would be important for our collection. So we wound up with a fabulous sculpture and a couple of paintings based on 1986 and went up to 2006. And we feel very strongly, and we'll be showing that next season in the warehouse. They're rather large. So I don't know if that gives you an idea of the scope of the collection, but generally we're looking for younger artists that have creative ideas that are not necessarily derivative completely of the so-called contemporary masters. So that's what we're looking for.
Okay, got it. People in this group will want to know whether you purchase or look at art by artists who are not represented by galleries ever.
Absolutely. We look at everything we can, and if something tickles our fancy, we move ahead, although sometimes it's not successful. We found one artist that we really liked her work a lot, and she just couldn't part with the work. There was a hesitancy. We wanted to have a show for her, and she had such a strong emotional attachment to the work that we just could not penetrate that. So we just moved on.
You know, as I sit here and talk to you guys, I mean, I feel like I'm talking to artists. You know, you have a vision, you have a passion, you have, you know, like fancy cars are not going to, you know, some whimsical thing are not going to become part of this collection. You know, it has an integrity, it has a soul. You know, I think to an extent you are servants of the collection as opposed to the other way around. You know, it's a manifestation of a vision. I think that's all really special.
Well, I appreciate those comments, Paul. It's very, very, very touching that you would recognize that.
Thank you. Recognize, I mean, yeah, you do, and I recognize it, and I appreciate it. And, you know, I can hear it in your voice and Katherine's, you know, besides, you know, the attitude. That said, what do you think about the notion of people buying art with investment in mind, of being able to resell it at a profit at a later time? How does that strike you?
Well, it's that type of thing. I mean, a lot of the hedge fund people have huge money and they look at art as an investment. There are a lot of people I know that are collecting that have a spiritual connection to this work,
right?
Whatever it may be. And somehow, after we've had a lot of work and we take down some of the work and store it, we put it in storage, we don't sell it, and somehow there's a connection, even though we don't hang it. We just know that in the past we've gotten pleasure out of it. We still get pleasure out of it when we don't see it because we know what it is. And, you know, people invest and that's their prerogative. I don't condemn it, and that's what they get enjoyment out of. So I do things a little differently.
I appreciate the clarity. Do you get involved? Do you commission work?
We have in the past, very, very rarely. We did when I was I was doing a real estate project in Miami in Coconut Grove on the water, and we commissioned a couple of works, Alex Lieberman, and a couple of other works we commissioned, but we don't really do much of that. We might buy something and ask the artist what their thoughts might be, where we should put it, and so forth. But we're not really much on commissioning.
But you will make structural changes to your buildings and architecture to accommodate works of art.
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Site commissions, we just don't see, we don't do much of that, but what we do is, for instance, Olafur Eliasson, the Icelandic artist who was represented by Tanya Bonnick Gallery, he had one of his first major shows in the U.S. I think it was in 2000, and Marty saw the work in New York, and we purchased the right to install it in Miami. You don't actually buy the work, but you work with the artist who will take your site and then, give you architectural drawings, and then you execute the work according to his instructions, and you try to replicate the feeling of the spirit of the work, but it's a site-specific work. And we tear down and move walls. Well, we just tore down and moved a bunch of walls last week. So, I mean, we're constantly adjusting the space for the art. That's something that we do at the drop of a hat.
That's cool. Do you think you have more? You must. You have more art in storage than you have on exhibit?
Yes, we do.
By a factor of 3 or more?
I'd say, I don't even know.
Okay, good.
We just put the work in storage, and when we're ready for the next season, we only change the work after the season is over. We sit down and say, gee, wouldn't it look nice if we put a Richard Long over here, or maybe, we haven't seen Tobias Putrick in a long time. Maybe we should put that up this year. And we just kind of have fun doing that. That's a lot of the enjoyment out of it.
When's the season over? Like next month or now?
Yes, next month, and in the summer we just think about what we're going to do for the fall.
So you're not open during the summer typically?
No, we're not. We're closed for the summer, and we do give lectures if we're around. It's primarily educational. Students come in and we tour them around, and we try and make them understand what a piece of work might be, and if they understand it, it helps them see it a little better. That doesn't mean they'll like it.
No, exactly, but it does open their eyes. I've talked to some of those students at some of the receptions you've had, during Miami Basel in early December, and, they get it. They know what's going on, and they understand it's expanding their horizons and, a different life than the one they're in, that I think often, gives them some potential to do something that their parents didn't do. I think that's really healthy. When you store the art, is it at a different site?
We have several storage places. One is in the warehouse itself, and then we have another facility where we primarily store large-scale sculpture.
Did you see in the newspapers today? I think it was covered in the New York Times and CNN also. Today is the 20th anniversary of the Gardner Museum heist in Boston, and they were talking about they think they know where some of these these paintings have gone, which at that time were $30 million worth of paintings, which are now maybe hundreds of millions of dollars worth of paintings. I don't know. Do you worry about things like that? Do you have to worry? I mean, do you consider yourself a museum, first of all?
We consider ourselves more of an educational institution.
Do you worry about insurance and liability, not liability, but protecting some of the art you have?
Not really. We're more interested in the condition of the work, that there's no deterioration due to a storm or something like that. But we're not worried about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. But I guess the gardener I don't think had insurance. I mean, and I don't know. They didn't have very good guards either. A
lot of the work in my house, you can't even get in the elevator.
I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, selling you a very large Jun Kaneko ceramic dunga, which I believe you took up the outside of the building to get it into your home.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's kind of a deterrent.
Crane, take down the railing on the balcony and pull it in with a bunch of men.
Yeah, we had to weld off the balcony.
Wow. So, all right. So what other kinds of things have you done to accommodate your aesthetic and your taste? Your acquisitions. I mean, that one I think is sort of extreme by some people's standards, but certainly I can think of things on view in your warehouse that were more challenging.
Well, we're kind of used to it, so there's nothing unusual about us getting a forklift and putting a 10-ton rock by Michael Heiser, a volcanic rock, in the ground, cutting out the floor. That's not unusual for us, because we always know that to show the work at its best profile is really the ultimate goal. The thing we have the most difficulty with are videos, because we have no capacity from ourselves to handle that. Most of our videos, we have to bring in some people who are familiar with technical work, and we bring them out from New York or from where else to do that.
And since we started acquiring videos, I think there's, how many are in the collection? There's over 100 videos in the collection, maybe 120, 125 videos. So the first videos we purchased, you would just go to the gallery and they'd send you a DVD. But now artists, and particularly video artists, are becoming more and more specific about the room, the projectors. Some of the videos are really installations that involve other mechanics and 3 screens and all different types of technical information that it is a little bit hard to keep up with it. Although, having said that, I think now we have about 15 videos going at the warehouse on public view.
The kids love the videos. The kids that come in, the high school students,
especially the elevator.
Yeah, that's a video.
I know.
The people in that elevator are video.
Right.
Yeah.
So the kids love it.
I would think so. What are your long-term plans? Where do you see the collection in 50 years?
50 years, I won't see it.
I know. That's why I'm asking. What's the plan?
Well, we will probably dispense the collection in terms of selling it. A lot of
the word you used, I'm sorry, say that again. You'll probably do what?
We'll sell a lot of the collection,
okay.
And that money that we get will go to charity. For instance, we're very supportive of a homeless shelter for women and children in Miami that takes care of 115 women and children, and we're going to be expanding that to get another 60 women and children. And we really believe that we're going to be helping people that are underserved and have fallen through the cracks. So the bulk of the estate, if that's what you're asking, Paul, will go to charity, and my children will get some kind of they won't get any art. They'll get some cash, but they have to make a career for themselves and have a value as a human being. But we're very much into children's charities. That's where our money will go.
Are your children involved in the collection at all?
One of my sons is trying to get into being an artist representative, and my other two younger children are going to the School of Visual Arts, and they are interested not so much in the collection, but they're interested in the creative aspect of design.
Got it. So, but you don't see maintaining the collection as an entity in perpetuity.
No, I don't see that.
Okay. What percentage of the collection is primary acquisitions as opposed to on the secondary market?
I would just guess that going back on a time period, that in the beginning, many of the works were primary acquisitions, because in those days, 30 years ago or so, there weren't that many collectors that were out there beating the bushes. And today, if you have 4 or 5 works, you open up your own museum. It's like, you know, everybody wants to be a collector. When I was collecting, I'm in the real estate business. I build buildings. And when I started collecting, my fellow colleagues in building, they thought I was crazy. What is he doing buying paintings and sculpture? And I thought I was crazy too. It was a nice craziness, and that's how I wanted to live my life. So it's a different world now. The world has changed. There were a handful of collectors that were people that wanted a higher pursuit. You could just name them: the Tremaine collection, the Skull collection.
Yeah.
You know, there were some terrific collectors, and Panza from Italy was one of the greatest I've ever seen.
Manel.
Ludwig, and now today it's a whole different ballgame. It's like how much can you spend on a work, and you get labeled immediately. So I'm sort of out of that loop.
Connoisseurship has kind of left the equation, hasn't it?
Well, a lot of these people that are buying mega works, they have advisors, and maybe you hope that eventually, being around it, it permeates within them, and they start to enjoy it and like it. So, you know, there's still a lot of connoisseurs out there.
Yeah, there are. So do you involve yourself? Are you involved in the Miami art community beyond the warehouse? Are you involved? Do you serve on boards of other art entities around the planet? What's your engagement beyond your own individual activity?
Well, I contribute to some of the art institutions, but I'm not on any boards, and I'm not involved very much into a lot of the cultural organizations in Miami.
We do curate exhibitions from the collection. That we have a relationship with a community college on the west coast of Florida, and we have a relationship with an organization in Spain that we worked with. They published a book on a exhibition that was curated from our photography collection. And at any given one time, we can have anywhere from 20 to 200 works out on loan from the collection. So we work extensively. We have a work going out to the Whitney Museum, a work going out to the Museum of Modern Art within the next couple of months. And we're have an exhibition at the University of Florida from our Helen Levitt and Walker Evans holdings in the fall. So singular loans as well as exhibitions that are culled from the collection is an ongoing project that we have, and we contribute to organizations through that way.
Do you still get pleasure going to visit your art at other venues, or not anymore?
Well, we don't, I went to Barcelona where they had a traveling show in 3 cities of 160 of our photos. And I didn't really go, I went because I wanted to see how the work was hung in terms of its context. But I really went because the people there were fantastic, and it's a friendship that I'll have the rest of my life. And it's more about the people that you meet. I don't need to see the work, that I lent. I know it's in good hands, and if I see the work, the Indiana at the Whitney or the Oldenburg at the MoMA, it'll be nice, but that doesn't really, I don't go whoop-de-doo when I see it.
Okay. Let's open this up for questions in a moment. You guys can start raising hands, and I'll get to you in a minute if you have a question. How far in advance do institutions contact you to borrow something for an exhibit? It's pretty far in advance, isn't it? It must be over 12 months and pushing 18.
Yes. Although some of the more local institutions, it's a less of a time frame, but yeah, they work on at least a whole year notice.
Yeah, I think it's complicated and challenging for, it's hard to, I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering who's keeping track of where everything is. I mean, I recently reviewed a museum show in Chicago, and there were paintings that I think they should have had that they didn't have. I'm assuming they knew about them, and I'm wondering why they weren't available. I mean, I think it's a challenge for doing that. When you guys are doing an exhibit, you're typically, have you ever borrowed art to augment what you have? You're not doing that. It's solely from the holdings, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't borrow.
Okay, cool. Tamara has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Martin and Katherine, for speaking with us. The question I have, particularly for how you have an educational facility through the warehouse, is what do you consider the role of art in our culture?
Wait a minute, I didn't hear the last part of it. What do you consider the role of art? What?
In our culture, in our society, what's the purpose of art?
There's a pretty open question, guys. Martin, want to go after it?
Okay, well, as you can see through these inaugurations and everything and these awards from the Kennedy Center, art encompasses the creative aspects of man in his inherent sense. And the creative aspect is what makes this country great. And if you don't have that creativity, you've got nothing. And it's wonderful from music, from theater, from opera, from art, visual arts, and all these different creative venues. And it's about what this country is, and every country has that. I mean, you look at Iraq, and there's artists in Iraq, there's artists in Syria. Unfortunately, they're under the radar, but it's about man's creative impulse in their lives.
I feel that American society appreciates culture less than European countries. Do you agree? And why do we think this is the case? Or why is this
America less?
I think we have a less.
European?
I think artists in the United States are less respected than artists in Spain, arbitrarily.
I agree with that, because those countries have been in existence far longer than our country. And they have a historical genealogy of supporting arts, looking at art, and just generally the cultural aspects where you go to Paris or you go to one of these cities and you see 6-year-olds going into museums, and they're sitting there drawing on the floor. They're sitting there talking about colors, and it's indoctrinated in them right from an early age, plus their historical aspect of their lives. They're always around music. There's probably less TV. There's probably less what we have, but they kind of have a certain cultural identification with all different kinds of art, more so than we do.
You know, part of my mission in this course in life is to, you know, do what I can to make that situation different and to get artists more respect and more appreciated by people on their block and in society in general. And I'm, you know, I know you agree with that in terms of, you know, making your collection available to the public and the public mission that you have about it. Amy, you have a question. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. My question is, it's really encouraging to hear that you're open to considering works by artists who don't have formal representation. If an artist does have works that we think might fit your interest, how do you like to be approached? Is there a time of year? Is it better to go through Katherine? It seems like also as a collector that you really like to understand the creative impulse of the artist and a lot of the meaning behind the work, which is more of a conversation. And I think sometimes that's hard to introduce without getting too involved. Do you prefer just an image? And if that's interesting, go from there, email, snail mail, press? Just curious.
I think it's a combination of all of those things. It is important to get your work out there, and so that you have exposure on all of those different sort of levels to a collector like us. What comes to mind is an artist that we contacted directly, and he was a photographer. His name is Tim Hetherington, and unfortunately he was
him before he passed. He's amazing.
Yeah, he was unfortunately killed in the in Libya, but you know, we saw his work in a magazine and just called him up directly and said, you know, these photographs are interesting. They were not photographs that were of Libya. They were of West Africa. He lived in West Africa for 2 years, and so Marty called him, and he sent it. So we were, at the time, we were sort of interested in presenting photographs, video, and sculpture and works, paintings for an Africa show. And so we had just seen them in one of the photography magazines and called him, and he sent us images, and we had this interesting back and forth with him. This kind of goes to what I was saying earlier. You know, you don't have to be physically close to someone to have a friendship with them. So we sort of developed a friendship with him, and he, you know, we bought the photographs from him and had them in the Africa show, and you know, 2 years later, unfortunately, he perished. But you know, that was one way that we went directly to an artist. Yes, we do receive emails. We can't respond to all of the emails because otherwise we'd have to spend more money on staff rather than on art. And I'm always trying to find ways that we can, you know, take whatever resources we have and use them to acquire art. So yes, we do receive emails at the warehouse. It's always important to have all the information right up front. And to your question about someone like Mr. Margulies does like to get information about the work, about your ideas, an artistic statement. Sometimes collectors like to analyze work with the artist, and sometimes they like to do it themselves, privately, like to have you go and that's why, of course, it's interesting to go to the galleries, because you can walk into the room and there's no one there but you and the artwork. And it's immediate. You either have an impact, you either have a relationship to the work, and sometimes, you know, you like to stand there with the artist and talk about the piece. But so I know that that's sort of an answer that's going around in circles. But I think it's important to do all of those things you mentioned. You know, get your work out there through. And also banding together. One of the other ways that we find artists is talking to the artists that we like and say, well, who are you looking at? Who are you interested in? And they say, well, I've got this friend, he's doing this work. So, you know, band together as artists. we give a lot of tours to art students, and I know all of you are out of school for the most part, but one time a graduate student at one of the universities here in Florida came up to me and said, well, how do you get into a collection like this? And my response to him was, that really should not be a question in your mind at all. You should be asking yourself, who else thinks like me? What other art do I like? Who can I work together with? Who can I collaborate with? Who can I show my work with? You know, don't think about how do I get into a great collection, but rather think about finding your voice and finding other like-minded people. So that would be my answer.
And if you do that, then the kinds of things that you want to have happen, you know, you will end up in appropriate collections instead of wrong collections, etc.
Yes, that's right. Because, you know, we do talk to artists when they come to the warehouse. We'll give them a space, and then over the course of the week, they're installing their work. They'll tell us about interesting things that they've seen, and of course, then you become curious because you have something in common with this artist, and you like what his work is, and so you're interested to hear what he has to say about other artists that he knows.
You know, I think that's the thing that's so obvious and yet so obfuscated in this course for artists is that, you know, so much of this is about relationships and how you grow a community and how you're giving and not only taking, you know, so we're differentiating, I think, between growing a community and networking. But the kinds of things you talk about, word of mouth, somebody says, hey, I like your work, what do you like? I mean, those are obvious interactions of humans with one another, yet so often we don't think about, you know, we don't realize that things happen in such a serendipitous manner.
Very true.
Barry, you had a comment or question. Go ahead, Barry.
Hi, I guess I had a kind of a nuts and bolts question. First of all, in terms of it being closed in the summer, your warehouse, is that because of the sheer heat down there?
Talk a little louder, please.
I'm sorry.
Because of the heat in the summer?
Wait, go back a bit further, Barry. You asked it. Wait, Barry, hold on. Go back a little further because I missed it too. So I got the preface, but go ahead and ask your question from the beginning.
Sure, I had a couple nuts and bolts questions. That being, you're not open during the summer. Is that purely because of the heat and humidity down there, or is that vacation time, or what?
I guess it's both. But have you been to Miami during the summer?
No, probably a good idea that I haven't.
We'll send you some temperature readings from the summer, and then you'll know the answer to your question. Okay. Nobody comes to Miami during the summer.
Fair enough. So I guess the other question I had was, being as that you're a business person, how do you balance your day or given period of time, whatever increment, between your collecting and your work? Is it intermingled, or is it something you segregate on vacation time, or how does that work?
Well, it balances very well. And the reason it balances well is because the people that work for me are fantastic. And they cover up all my mistakes. And they're really very dedicated and very loyal. And I run everything through them because they're very capable in what they're doing.
Thank you.
Other folks have questions? I can remember. Do you have questions? Go ahead and raise your hand. Digitally. And I can remember looking at definitions of collectors at one point, and I stumbled across something where Marcel Duchamp said there were 4 collectors in the United States, 3 in New York and 1 in New Jersey. I guess he didn't know Marty. And Leo Castelli defined a collector as someone who spent more time buying art than they did earning money to pay for it. And I defined a collector as someone who continues to buy art after their walls are full. Though I would think that many galleries and artists would define a collector as someone who owns more than 5 works of art. We met with somebody, we met with Patrick McCoy. I think Patrick's group has a collectors group. They define a collector as someone who has 7 or more works of art. I don't know, just an interesting aside. Diane, go ahead.
Hi, Katherine and Martin. Thank you for joining us tonight. This has been an absolute treat. I visited your collection a couple of weeks ago when I was in Miami, and it was phenomenal. I had the best time. It was fascinating and wonderful quiet time. And Martin, your generosity in giving back to society is absolutely amazing. I have a question. I was wondering, since you collect from much of your collection or is from younger artists, is there a percentage or have you ever been disappointed in what you've collected? Since it's a lot of it's cutting edge material, and with time, have you found that it has not been what you had thought it would be?
Well, I answer that question because I've asked that. People have asked me that, and the answer to that is that everything that I've acquired over the years, whether I have grown or moved on, has been a learning experience for me. So the work itself is part of the growth of the collection. And without that work, the collection wouldn't be where it is today. It's all a matter of learning and continuous learning. It's always continuous because young people are coming out with new ideas. Now they're working with the computer, and it's amazing. And it's always a learning experience. And in order to get to C, you got to get through A and B first. And so that's what my ideas on it are. And again, it's a sensitivity also to the artist. He's putting he or her are putting their creative efforts into an object. And who am I to say I'm disappointed? I'm saying, you know, it's like telling my kids after they come home and they say, gee, Dad, I didn't do so well in school. So I say to them, did you try? And will you learn from this experience? That's what it's about.
I've got a kid in college. I'm going to remember that because I think you just said something better than I did the last time I had to say that. I feel like after I've had a work, I feel like a work of art is supposed to be challenging. And that over a period of time, I rise to the challenge that the artwork has provided me with. And I grow from that experience. And at some point, I feel like that process stops because I've gotten out of the art what maybe it's got more to give, but I've gotten out of it what I'm capable of getting. And then I sort of stop looking at it the same way and maybe stop looking at it at all, at which time I pretty much conclude it's time to give it away or sell it so that somebody else can have that experience and so that I can renew it with another different work of art. It sounds to me like you don't sell much of anything at all. Is that correct?
Occasionally I do.
But mostly you're holding on to it, and you hold on to it with the love and passion that, like an old blanket, that it got you to where you are.
Yes, that is correct.
Why have you sold some things?
The primary reason, the few works we sold, we realized we're not going to show it anymore in the warehouse. And we feel that it's time for this work to go to someone who would show it or who has a passion for it or whatever their reason for buying it, whether it be something to do with the retina or whether it be something to do with the mind. And so we feel that it's probably not going to have a life with us in terms of showing. So we move on.
Okay. It seems to me that 20 years ago or so, you did more with outdoor sculpture than is the case now. Am I wrong, or is that so?
You are correct. We did a lot of that, and that enhanced my real estate development. I built multifamily, and we put sculpture garden out in one of the buildings, or one of the on an island that I had bought, and built some apartments and a hotel. And then we put it out at the one university, and then eventually it had its day. So what we decided to do with some of this big sculpture was two things. Number one, we gave several of the pieces to educational institutions around Miami, one piece in Seattle, and they have a nice sculpture park at Seattle. And we gave some of the works away, and then there was one work I sold, and we got a considerable amount of money, and all those proceeds went to the homeless shelter for women and children. So when we do sell it, most of the works of that era that you're talking about, large-scale sculpture, have been donated to universities, including University of Florida, Cornell University, where my son went to school, and University of Miami, Miami-Dade College. So, you know, we give a lot of it away. Not a lot, but enough.
Got it. We should move towards wrapping this up, but I wanted to ask, oops, the question just evaporated. I don't know where it went. Somebody saved me. Does somebody have a question while I try to remember what I was going to say? Don't laugh at my old age.
Okay.
Diane, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, good.
Can you tell us the story behind spice bags? Or the spices, is that the correct name for it? It's in the...
The netto?
Yeah.
Yeah, the netto, Ernesto Netto.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, Ernesto Netto.
Can you tell us about that?
How I acquired it?
No, if you could tell us about the piece as to what inspired the artist to create such a magnificent sculpture.
Okay. The work, which resembles stalactites dripping down, are done, the material is latex, and it stretches. So the weight of the spices, in other words, who uses spices in their work? This was a wonderfully creative use of a material not normally associated with art, more associated with cooking. So he filled these bottom of these structures with these spices, and they had a weight to them. And so when the latex stretched, the element of time became part of the work, because over time, the work had changed by stretching. So there were elements of a unique material, the stretching of the work. The latex itself was a unique material. And of course, the idea of using the spices in that biomorphic form. The form is so organic, and it almost looks like a temporary type of thing. And that was the inspiration we had to acquire that work.
I've noticed over the years that I've been visiting your collection in Miami that time is definitely a factor, and it wouldn't surprise me we're touching the ground soon.
One of them has touched the ground. You're right on that.
And what do you do with that? You don't worry about it and you keep on moving, right?
No, we don't. We leave it. But we're going to be doing a terrific installation, and we'll probably take down the netto over the summer. We've had it up 4 or 5 years, and then we took it down and we put it back up. And we're having a very unusual installation by Sung Dung, a Chinese artist who we're very excited about. He appeared at the Venice Biennale, and we're going to have a series of doors from the 1950s, 100 doors that will be put in the configuration of a maze. So when you walk through that particular work, it's quite, come down and see it rather than listen to me.
There you go. Cool. Tamara, did you have another comment or question?
Yeah, I had a comment. I just really appreciate seeing where the arts and philanthropy intersect, and how we can give back as artists, as collectors, as people that care. So I just want to say that I really admire that and appreciate seeing those connections out there in the world.
Thank you.
Beautiful. You know what? I think that's an excellent place to wrap this up, too. Marty and Katherine, I think you guys have been really forthcoming, and, you know, the sense that I get from visiting the collection and each of you is of sincerity and genuineness and passion. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask parenthetically, but but you can just agree. I think being involved in the arts is an excellent way to stay young, and that it keeps us much younger than if we were just bankers or real estate developers without the arts. I think you guys have been fabulous. I think you're performing a service to arts, culture, this country, the world. I really appreciate you joining us tonight, and I really appreciate what you've done. Let me unmute everybody. We can all applaud in unison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you guys.